Chapter 20, page number 177 of Renegade. When the elevator stopped at the third floor, Jakob stepped out of the cage with his pistol at the ready. Two Westerners, a man and a woman, halted in the hallway and gazed at him with glassy eyes. Neither of them was Jonathan Sebastian. Before they could move, Jakob shot them both and walked past their bodies. He glanced at the numbers as he passed them, finding room 317 two more doors ahead. Stopping beside the door, he waved to Wally. The younger man moved forward, tried the lock, and shook his head. He stepped back and lowered his pistol, firing 3 rounds into the mechanism. The metal pieces dropped to the floor. Before the sounds of the silent shots faded, Wally threw his shoulder against the door and followed it inside. Jakob trailed on the young warrior's heels, scanning the room immediately. Frozen in surprise, Jonathan Sebastian sat on the bed's edge. The man was in his late 40s, an industry legend in international news. He had made his name covering the first war in Iraq over 20 years ago. That long history and the name recognition Sebastian enjoyed as a journalist were what had drawn Jakob to the man, though he radiated a sense of pompous self-worth that Jakob found repugnant. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and Jakob knew from the information, page 178, he had on the reporter that Sebastian had allowed himself to go gray because the vain man believed it would give him even more appeal to his viewers. The reporter was lean and in shape, and Jakob knew that he had a personal trainer. He wore suit trousers and went barefoot. His tie hung in half-mast, and his coat lay on the bed within easy reach. Another man stood at the window watching the curling black smoke coming from the city. He was half Sebastian's age, smaller, and looked immediately frightened. He held a small digital camera and had evidently been taking pictures of the destruction. Wally kept his weapon at the ready as he went forward and quickly searched both men for weapons. Jakob lowered the Makarov. "Jonathan Sebastian?" "Yes." Sebastian looked scared and confused. A trace of pride sailed through Jakob at the man's reaction. It was good to incite fear in one's enemies, but it was even better to do so to the people who spread the news. "Do you know who I am?" Sebastian glanced at the other man, who had taken a cowering step back till he reached the wall. He stood there, obviously wishing he were anywhere else. "He's Zalmay Jakob, sir," the man's voice broke. Sebastian nodded as he turned towards Jakob. "I met you when you were a boy." "I am no longer a boy. I interviewed your father, you know, back when such a thing was still possible, before the CIA strike. So I was told. My father remembers you well. He will be pleased to see you again. I thought your father was dead." "No, get dressed. You're coming with me." "Where?" "To the biggest story that you will have ever covered. One that will build your career even more than it already is." Sebastian sat still. "What if I don't want to go?" "You don't have a choice. Get up, put on your clothes on, and I'll have someone dress you. We don't have time for them to be gentle." Reluctantly, Sebastian stood. His face didn't reveal anything, but the man had to be factoring in his chances for rescue. "You can't just take me. Somebody like me, someone will be looking." "I know. I am counting on that. If you do not come with me, I will kill you and find someone else to relay this story. I would prefer you, but I refuse to argue. I do not have time." Jakob shifted the Markov in his hand meaningfully. "Neither do you." Sebastian put on his shoes and picked up his coat. He nodded to the younger man. "What about Kimball?" "He will not be joining us." Kimball appeared relieved, almost sagging with the emotion. "He's my cameraman." Jakob smiled at the American, conscious of the time slipping away. But now the attack on the hotel would have been reported. With all the action already transpiring in the city, a military force might even now be on its way. "I have cameramen." Jakob turned to Kimball. "You have a camera?" The man looked at the device as if it had somehow betrayed him. "Yes." He had to clear his throat to get that out. Jakob stood beside Sebastian. "Take our picture." Hesitantly, the man lifted the camera and tried to hold it steady. His hands trembled violently, but he managed to take the shot. Another. The man triggered the camera once more. Jakob held out his hand. "Please, give the camera to me." Page 180. So shaking, the man placed the camera in Jakob's palm. Jakob stepped back and nodded to Wally, adjusting the machine pistol he carried, alerting the American enough to make him raise his hands in his own defense. Wally sprayed him with bullets. Sebastian cursed hoarsely, but there was no anger in his words, only a raspy fear and the understanding that his life was no longer his own. Fearfully, he stared at Jakob. "Let us go." The Al Qaeda leader placed the camera on the desk in the corner of the room, where it would be found during the subsequent investigation, then turned and headed through the doorway into the hall, while he pushed the journalist into motion and followed. Jakob crossed the parking area without incident. He spotted some of the journalists hiding in the premises on the premises, talking on satellite phones and taking pictures or videos with their devices. Jakob didn't care. He stepped back into the SUV while Wally shoved Sebastian into the other side of the vehicle. Jakob kept the Makarov in his lap and gazed out the window. "What do you want with me?" Sebastian's fear almost shredded his words. "You have an important job ahead of you. You are going to be my chronicler, Mr. Sebastian." Jakob turned to the man and smiled. "You should be very grateful. The story you are about to reveal to the world is going to make you legendary in your circles. Your name, the things that you will host, will always be remembered in your country." "What are you talking about?" The driver started the SUV and put the vehicle into gear. "The Americans killed Osama bin Laden. He built Al Qaeda into the force that it is, ignited the fire of jihad against the West. But no one has done as much since his death. My people need a champion, and I intend to give them one. I intend to be that champion. I am going to pick up that holy war and drive the infidels from Afghanistan while they linger in their indecision and growing weakness. Then I'm going to attack them in their homelands. Since bin Laden's death, many have gone into hiding, but they still strike in this country. They are largely ineffectual because they are separate in their efforts. I will unite them, forge them into the weapon that God intended them to be. They will see that I am capable of what I am capable of, and they will flock to me. Blood will run in rivers in Afghanistan." As he spoke, the certainty of his future and his calling swelled inside of Jakob. God had called him forth to do this. His father had told him that, and now he believed it to be true. Sebastian shook his head. "You're painting a target on yourself. The military will hunt you down in the way that they did bin Laden." "No!" Jakob's voice exploded out of him, and he strove to control his anger. He wanted to slit the throat of the man for voicing doubt in the front of his followers. It took effort to remember that he needed the man. "No, that will not happen. The West has grown sicker of this war than they are afraid of Al Qaeda. I will teach them to fear the jihad again. Already many Afghans are turning against them. There will be more. The American president will see how much it will cost to continue this war. He will pull the troops from Afghanistan, and I will consolidate the warriors who will follow me. You won't get the Pentagon to back off. I will. The Pentagon does not lose its sons. The American people do, and they have no stomach for a continuance of the war. Allies of the American efforts are withdrawing. Already the Americans have overstepped themselves in Pakistan by putting illegal CIA bases in that country. They have undone political alliances there. The Russians are furious with the Americans and the British for allowing the opium trade to continue among the warlords they have agreements with. Because the drugs are pouring into their country, no one is happy with the way the Americans are conducting this war these days, and with the deals they are making, and the effects transgress the borders of the country. I will further discourage them. They are weak. They will give in. How do you plan to do that? By killing their soldiers. Every corpse that goes home to a grieving Western family is a butcher's bill for the cost of this war. Jakob shook his head. Our young are raised to be warriors. They willingly give their lives in a holy war because they know the rewards they will reap in heaven. They believe in Fard Ain, the personal obligation of the Muslim man to God. Your countrymen do not surrender themselves to so enthusiastically. Sebastian said nothing. That is why Al Qaeda will win. That is why I will win. The driver took evasive action without warning. Glancing forward, Jakob spotted two ANP pickups speeding towards them. The driver had shifted to allow the Afghan police passage on the street. At first, Jakob thought they might escape unnoticed, but the pickups quickly turned around, throwing out rooster tails of dirt as they reversed direction. The PA on one of the trucks blared out orders in Pashto behind them. "You there, stop!" The command was repeated in English, French, and Arabic. Shifting in his seat, Jacob watched as the SUV behind the one he was riding in braked and slowed down. The driver wove back and forth across the street, keeping the A&P vehicles behind him. The man operating the 7.62 mm machine gun mounted on the rear deck of the lead A&P truck opened fire. Bullets struck the SUV, shattering the rear glass and splashing blood inside the vehicle. The driver jerked the wheel and managed to bring the SUV to a rocky stop sideways in the narrow street, blocking both A&P pickups. The machine gunners aboard the two trucks opened their weapons full throttle as their drivers pulled into the overlapping field of fire. Two Al-Qaeda warriors stumbled out of the SUV, taking advantage of the protection offered by their vehicle, but already in dire straits. One of them hauled out an RPG, then lay on the ground and brought the weapon to his shoulder under the SUV. In an instant later, the warhead streaked away and smashed into the pickup on the right. The A&P vehicle buckled up a couple of feet, like a horse trying to rear on its hind legs, and then crashed back down. The blast left the front end smashed and warped, and gray smoke whisked from the vehicle. The surviving machine gunner laid down a vicious strafing attack that chewed through the pavement and tracked back to the Al-Qaeda warrior scrambling to get out from under the SUV. Bullets ripped him apart before he could take cover. His body quivered and went still beneath the vehicle. The second A&P pickup skirted the first, then turned down an alley to the left. Wally calmly tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Take the next alley to the left. They are coming up the side street in an effort to intercept us on the next cross levels ahead." A feeling of ease dawned inside Jacob. Wally was a master of terrain and always planned out their missions. The driver nodded and braked the SUV. Then he turned the vehicle sharply and headed into the alley as instructed. The vehicle ahead of them continued forward, following the path that they had chosen in anticipation of the kidnapping. Jacob sat trusting Wally because he guessed what the younger warrior was planning. It was a daring move, and not without risk. He took pride in the young man, wishing more like him would join his ranks. Evidently they would. The mouth of the alley came closer. "Now," Wally raided the AK-47 and peered ahead. "Turn right, quickly, quickly." Obeying, the driver hauled the wheel to the right. The acceleration caused the SUV to skid, and then the tires found purchase again. The heavy vehicle rocked on its suspension for a moment and then straightened out. Ahead of them, the A&P pickup rounded the next corner at the cross street. "Quickly!" Wally kept the AK-47 in one hand and placed his free hand on his seatbelt release. "Turn the corner. Go after them. Ram them from behind when you can. Do you hear me?" "I hear." The driver hauled on the steering wheel again, turning the SUV sharply. On the cross street, the A&P pulled to a halt at the corner as the lead SUV flashed by. The driver of that vehicle had slowed, doubtless looking for Jacob's SUV. The machine gunner on the pickup's rear deck hesitated but tracked the first SUV with his weapon. "Ram them, now!" Wally braced his feet against the floor. Jacob braced himself as well and held on to the Makarov. The SUV's front end was reinforced with rebar welded over the bumper to protect the engine. When the two vehicles slammed into each other, the SUV's greater weight knocked the A&P pickup forward. On the rear deck, the machine gunner staggered. Then he held on to the weapon in an effort not to get knocked over the side. Not so lucky. His companion spilled into the street. Wally opened his door as they neared the hapless policeman. Disoriented, doubtless in shock, the man shoved his head up just in time to catch Wally's door in the face. The thump resounded in the SUV and the man's body rolled limply to the side. "Keep pushing them. Keep pushing," Wally screamed into the driver's ear. Unable to regain control of the vehicle, the A&P driver tried to speed up and get away. The SUV had more power and closed rapidly as the driver struggled to cut to the right. The larger vehicle caught the pickup on the right rear corner, pushed its rear tires so that they lost traction, and turned it sideways across the front of the SUV. They crossed the narrow street and slammed into the front of a shoe store, causing the people inside to duck away from the large plate glass windows. Jagged shards dropped from the windows and cascaded in pieces across the pickup. The smaller vehicle crushed inside as the SUV bore down on it. Three policemen screamed on the other side of the fractured glass. "Enough!" Wally released his seatbelt. "Back away and stop!" With a wrenching howl of twisted metal, the driver reversed the SUV about 10 feet, and then came to a rocking halt. Wally got out on one side and Jakob stepped from the SUV on the other. Some of the people inside the shoe shop had started forward, perhaps thinking that an accident had occurred instead of an ambush. Jakob fired into them, wounding some of them and driving them all back. Mercilessly, Wally shot the injured man in the pickup bed, and then went forward and gunned down the driver and one of the passengers as well. All three of the men inside had been trapped by the crushed doors. The last man attempted to crawl from the door window, slicing his hands and forearms on the broken glass. Jakob walked towards the survivor, relishing the terror he saw in the man's eyes. The man hung there, trapped by the dead man on his legs and his injuries resulting from the crash. The man sucked in air as he stared helplessly at Jakob. "No, please have mercy. I ask this in God's name." He prayed frankly, his voice breaking with his fear. "You are a traitor to God. He does not hear your prayers, and I will not listen to them." Jakob looked around at the bystanders, knowing he commanded their attention too, and then he held the pistol inches from the man's head and pulled the trigger. The policeman relaxed in death as blood wept down the side of the wrecked pickup. Jakob turned to the SUV. Sebastian looked pale and sickly and had managed to free himself from his seatbelt. He froze in place with one leg out the door when Jakob pointed the pistol at him. "Get back inside it or die. Here on the street." Jakob glared at the man. Trembling, Sebastian crawled into the SUV. Jakob joined him. Then the driver got under way again, once more rushing through the streets like a black shark. End of chapter 20.